I'm here with Austin of Outer Heaven to talk about the latest record, Infinite Psychic Depths, out July 21st on Relapse Records. Thank you very much for taking the time today to chat with me about the album. Welcome to the channel. How's things going with you?
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. Things are going well. Busy week. It always seems to happen right as we get near a new album. Always a lot to do, a lot to prepare for, but it's going well.
Does that process ever get old?
Old, no. Tiring, sure. It can be a lot sometimes. Out of all of my band members, handle a lot of the press and stuff and do the interviews. They write all the music, but it's not rare, but it's less often that when you do an interview that they want to talk about uh, guitars and stuff. So it's like a lot of the ideas and stuff for the narrative and the art and all this stuff come from me in my mind. So they feel I have a better input on a lot of that stuff. So, and I'm more, you know, adept to handle this kind of stuff. So I don't get bored with it, but I enjoy it. I mean, the fact that anybody wants to talk about it is nice. So I definitely appreciate it.
So definitely not your least favorite part of an album release cycle.
No, the worst part is after you hand it in finished, just waiting around for it to come out. Because there's a period of time after you hand in a finished product to the label, and you're just waiting. You're waiting for a single to come out or anything. That process for us this time around was about 5 or 6 months. We handed it in back like in the end of December, beginning of January, and we had a first single come out in May, so 5 months just kind of waiting.
That's a long time to sit on a record, I must say. It gives you enough time to go into the weeds and start thinking about things. And was that really the right move for that song or the right move for that riff? And I'm sure that happens quite a bit.
Sure, we this time around we took a lot of time on the front end, before handing the album in to really kind of hash things out more so than even on the last album, Realms, because with Realms, we had just signed to Relapse and we basically had a finished album written. We just needed to record it. And they said, hey, well, if you can hand in a finished album by this time after we had signed with them, we could have it out this year. And we were like, oh man, okay, we got to rush to get this thing done. And it was a big rush to get into a studio, get everything done, get it mixed properly, mastered properly. This is going to be our debut on Relapse. So we kind of did everything a little quicker last time. So this time we really took our time and kind of let things ramp up at our own speed. So I think we felt really good about what we had handed in. So not too much second guessing, hopefully.
So when it came to this album, did you guys have a vision and worked towards that vision, or was the process a little bit more organic? And as the songs came about, you started looking at them and putting them together in order to create what the final product is all about.
I think the overall goal was just to really at the essence of it was to just keep our sound that we had created for ourselves. We always like to pride ourselves on having like an Outer Heaven sound, and I'm glad that people have started to recognize that on this new album. um you know we try not to be too followed, too many trends and stuff like that. Just things we like, things we would like to hear, in music in general, stuff that we would listen to. um and really it just kind of comes naturally, I think. There's a lot of things that didn't make it onto the album, I can say that much. It came to their minds when they were writing, so they put it down in a recording. We keep a huge drive online where we keep everything, demo tracks and riffs and every ideas for everything. And we have tons and tons of stuff that went unused for the album, because in the end, even though it might have been an awesome riff or an awesome part, it wasn't quite working for this, our sound. Like, yeah, people might, like, you could say to yourself, yeah, people will definitely like this, but we really were trying to mold our sound and make it our own. And I think that we did a good job of that. And so I think that mostly just came naturally from my guys.
When you're in a band like Outer Heaven, like you said, with a defined sound. I mean, you guys have been able to define that sound across two records. Um, do you guys concern yourselves on how is the album going to feel for the listener that wants to sit down and go from first to last song? Because obviously there's a lot of heaviness, there's a lot of brutality, but you still have to find ways to make the album digestible, not just on a single basis, but like as a standalone record that you're going to enjoy from start to end. Do you guys think about that?
Sure. And to that point, we had gotten to a point in writing where we had about 9 songs, and we said, okay, yeah, I think we're done here. Um, Everything, we had written all the songs, and all the songs individually we thought were really great. And then we decided, okay, let's try to put them into a tentative track list for the album. And we were kind of coming up short to, in terms of what we thought was acceptable. And we just were like, okay, no matter what we do here, this song has to go here, this song has to go here. And we ended up writing more songs to fit that make the entire overall flow better of the album, for the exact reason that you're talking about, which is that we wanted to be able to have something that flowed so seamlessly and never got boring, but always stayed interesting, had a lot of different nuances, and if you've listened to the whole record from top to bottom, I think people will kind of notice that everything sounds like us, but every song is just different enough from all the other songs that it never gets boring as you go along. We achieved that with a lot of messing around with a lot of different timing and solos and leads and all kinds of stuff like that, that we hadn't really gotten heavy into on the last album. And I think that really worked well for us.
I thought even some of the intros in terms of how the song opens up and then some of the outros in terms of how the song ends created almost a sense of an interlude built into the tracks that allows you not to have interludes but still have the same effect as you get into a new song or as you get out of another song. I thought that was super intelligent. I don't know if it was on purpose or not, but it came across very intelligent in the overall perspective of the record.
I appreciate that. I'd say some of it was intentional, some of it maybe just happenstance. Some of the tracks, like where you maybe the guitar kind of the effects kind of ringing out and it kind of sounds like it was intentional. That might have just been something that happened while we were recording and it just was cool, so we kept it. I know, like at the end of like Star Crusher, it does that, because that big part at the end of Star Crusher where it's like all the crazy guitar and stuff going on, that just kind of he hit the end of the song and then he smacks the pedal, but the effect is still like going ding 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 at the end. So but there's some of this, it was definitely intentional and stuff that we had made a conscious effort to do. Some of the stuff was created just like using like a synth, like a keyboard. um all of on the track Rotting Stone DMT, when you hit that part where it kind of just goes to the noisy part before it goes into like the instrumental second half, we made all that on a synth. And we had actually made I had the idea for that song because Rotting Stone and DMT, those were actually, we wrote those as two separate songs, and I had a really great idea to merge them together in the way that they ended up being in the end. And so I had the idea to kind of juice it up with the noisy stuff. So we had actually recorded that stuff with the synth long before we ever even recorded the album. I just knew we were going to need it, and I knew how I wanted it to sound, and we had some free time, so we were sitting on it for a long time. But yeah, I mean, obviously that stuff was intentional, and some of the stuff that sounds like that on the album, but everything is mostly for a reason.
You mentioned defining the sound of the band, how recognizable it becomes. Is it part of that the ability to create an album that has as much heaviness as it does depth to that heaviness? Because I felt like this album defined it better than the previous record in terms of not just being heavy for heavy sake, but having some sort of depth to that feeling of heaviness that the record offers.
Sure. And it's, you always want to try I mean, most bands want to try to evolve, between albums. And we when we had written the first album, the Realms album, we had written that mostly with one guitar player. So, it was mostly just his mind, that created everything. And for this album, we had our second guitar player, Zach, through the entire process. And I feel like that was really the key to elevating everything, because our one guitar player, John, he's more of a techie kind of notey shredder kind of guy, and then Zach is more of like a thrashy kind of old school metal guy. And when you think about those two things and put them together, that's essentially what our music sounds like. It's a perfect combination of those two things, and that's mostly why. But other things that elevated us between the albums were just things like our drummer. We've always had the same drummer, and he on the last album he hadn't been playing metal for a long time, but for a few years, and he was mostly like a hardcore drummer. And then between just being in the band and playing out and playing the style all the time, he really made a really strong effort to elevate his skill, in terms of speed and technicality and everything else. So I think the drum is a bit of a standout. The drumming's a bit of a standout between the two albums, because he really made a conscious effort to elevate his ability. And then the same thing, like with the leads and the solos and stuff, everything on there that isn't like a featured guest doing a solo is our guitar player, Zach. And he comes from like a Iron Maiden, like type of background, where he just loves the shreddy stuff. So a lot of he's kind of the mastermind behind most of that sound, most of the solos on our album. I thought he did a good job on that as well.
You've been dishing out love to the guitar players, to the drummer. I mean, you haven't dished it out to yourself, but I'm sure you tap yourself in the back every so often. What about the bass? I thought the bass on this record sounded
Sure.
phenomenal. Phenomenal.
I'm glad that people are able to pinpoint the bass and recognize what's going on with it, because the bass on this album was played by Derek Vella from Tomb Mold, who he plays guitar in Tomb Mold. But he was playing with us for a time, and then COVID happened, and so basically we finished writing the album without him. And then he recorded all the bass at a studio in Canada where he lives, and he played the whole album on a fretless bass, with the intention of getting that real smooth sound and kind of just noodling around all over the album. And he asked us if that was okay, because he didn't want it to be like too overbearing, with everything else, or too out of place. And we said, yeah, that's fine. And he had sent us demos of the whole album and stuff, but in the end, I think it turned out really well. And the bass playing is definitely a standout without being too overbearing, even though at some parts it is kind of technical.
Yeah, it really
It's
pops. It
it's
really
just
pops in the
it's
mix.
it's just enough.
Yeah, it's just the right amount for you to notice, but
Yep.
not to the point where you feel like it's just too much of it. Like
Yep.
it's perfect. It's just the perfect thing. And funny enough that you mentioned that, because man, it seems like I'm in Toronto. Canadian guys really love technical death metal, and they really love their fretless basses. So not shocked
Sure.
that that combination made its way into this record, but I'm loving it, because I thought you guys didn't push the technical side too much on it, but you definitely gave us a taste of what the bass is offering on this record. And I think it has an incredible impact in the overall sound, because it makes the sound feel more complete. It's not just heavy drums, heavy guitars. You have that bass there underneath it that gives it a little bit more texture to the sound.
Sure. It's just another layer. The sounds are very layered, and we do that on purpose. Just having the bass play along to everything else, would that have been fine? Yeah, probably. But can we elevate the entire thing by putting in some technicality? Sure. And I think that's what really had Derek interested in playing on this album in particular, because I think he heard the songs and recognized the fact that he would be able to play around like that, when it came time to record his bass tracks and stuff. We're actually going to be playing in Toronto in September, with Tomb Mold and Undeath.
So is he doing double duties?
No, we have a bass player now that plays with us, but what had happened was is that Derek was actually supposed to move here to Philadelphia, which is not far from where we live and practice. His fiance at the time, now his wife, lived here in Philadelphia, and he had plans of moving here because of that. But then COVID came, and it became very difficult, to migrate to the US from Canada. And the process was extremely difficult and extremely long. So after about a year, probably, they realized that it was actually easier for her to just go to and become a citizen in Canada. So she went to Canada, and that kind of put a pin in our whole plan of having him, around here to play with us. But he managed to
Who's
play.
Yoko Ono to your John Lennon?
Well, he essentially he played one. He did manage to play one show with us in the time that he was, playing with us. We played a show in February right before COVID at St. Vitus in New York. Our live album that we have is the recording from that show. So Derek is playing on that LP, or that live 12-inch. So his one show with us ended up at least getting some sort of a it was cemented in vinyl, at least for his trouble. But yeah, it's sad that that didn't work out, because he really put a lot of effort into this album. But who knows, maybe he'll hop on for a song or two when we link up with him, because we haven't even seen him in a long time. He recorded everything up in Toronto, and they sent it over to us, and we threw it in the session, and the album's coming out already now. So it'll be good to see him, and to maybe he can play a couple songs with us.
Well, I'm looking forward to that show. I'm definitely going to be there in Toronto. I don't want to miss you guys performing tracks from this record specifically. I really enjoyed this album,
We
and
definitely will.
we've talked about Everybody But You. So let me ask you this: with all of these guest vocalists on this record, was that your chance to kind of like take a breather, considering how the heavy toll of recording, and you're like, I'm the vocalist, I need a break here and there. Let's get some guys doing some vocals on the album.
I always liked collaborations. I like hearing them on other people's albums, like that one Deeds of Flesh album that came out a few years ago that had like a guest on every single track. Some people think it's overkill, so I try to be tasteful with it, but I enjoy it. I like having friends on the album, and just other people from other bands that I like. I like with the Steve Tucker vocals that we had on the album. That was like my big one. I was like, okay, guys, if there's one I can do and put all my effort into getting, it's going to be that one. All I ended up doing in the long run was messaging Steve Tucker on Instagram and asking him if he'd be interested in doing it. And he was like, hell yeah, brother, we'll do it. And he was very good and quick and easy about it. And he does not do a lot of like guest spots or anything. According to Metal Archives, aside from ours, he's only ever done one other one. That was cool, kind of, since he hasn't really done it a lot. JR from Pig Destroyer, that just came from being friendly with those guys. We played with them, and they did like a couple nights playing a couple albums in Baltimore, and we played with them a couple nights and stuff like that. Alex from Undeath, those, we're friendly with them. I've had them stay here at my house before when they played in the area. Just, it just comes from being friends. I like to collaborate with my friends on our music because I love their music. I love what they do. And that's basically all that really ever, the reason that ever came about.
At what point in the process do you start thinking about those guys? Like, do you put the song together thinking already of who you're going to ask, or the song kind of
I think
hints on who needs it?
I think it's a mixture of things. Like, for example, the Steve Tucker vocal part, that was recorded before I had recorded one single word on this album. I knew I wanted him on there, and so I messaged him really early on in the process in case it was like going to take some time, or they had touring plans or something. I said, I'm going to get to it early. So when he had agreed to it, I actually hadn't even written the lyrics yet for the part that he was going to do. And the reason he was on that song in particular was because the working title for the song that he's on was like Morbid or Morbid Stomp or whatever, So it was like our ode to Morbid Angel, Steve Tucker era Morbid Angel songs. And so I knew that I really wanted him on that song in particular. So I actually, when he messaged me back that night, I wrote the lyrics and then I sent it to him the next morning. But like for example, the song that JR is on, that song's kind of got like a grindy sound to it at some parts, and in the part that he's on was like the grindiest part of the whole song, and I was like, yeah, we haven't had a lot of this stuff before, and I was like a little unsure of what I wanted to do. So I said, hey, I'll get somebody who, you know, has been playing this kind of music for a long time to do this. And we wrote the lyrics for him for that part as well. My drummer did. Um, and then with Alex, same thing. Track 9, Palisade Chambers, the one that he's on. That one's like the grooviest one, like on the whole album. Real like early Carcass kind of sound. And I thought that Undeath sound was a lot like that. And I thought he would be good for that reason. You know, just it was reminding me kind of like of their sound a little bit. Um, Stuff like that, you know.
Is there an extreme metal vocalist out there that hits the spot for you? Is Steve Tucker the one, or is there somebody else out there?
My favorite of all time is Glenn Benton. Uh I love the sound of his voice. I take a lot of tricks of his. Deicide always does this thing where it's low vocal and high vocal at the same time, or two low vocals at the same time. Every vocal is always being double tracked on a lot of their albums. So on our album, the vocal is every single time you're hearing a vocal of mine, it's double tracked. Whether it's the low vocal and the high vocal at the same time, to like a low vocal and then like a really low, like almost guttural vocal. They do that a lot on Deicide records. I totally yanked that for us, and I've done that through the entirety of this band. Every single release we ever did, I've done that. And lyrically, he's a genius in my opinion. I mean, it's very hard to write like evil shit that is like catchy and like has hooks and is like not like really on the nose. You know what I mean? There's something I just really loved about like Deicide's whole vibe, the sound of their music, the vocals, the attitude. That's one that I really loved. And then of course, Morbid Angel was always a big one. Both eras, you know, always I enjoyed. And then um Cannibal Corpse, of course, that's one that I get compared to a lot. But yeah, when people hear that I like Deicide, sometimes it kind of clicks for them when they hear like what I'm doing with my vocals, you know. And I tried to do some different stuff on this album, and I tried to expand what I was doing a little bit more. And then you have stuff like on track 6, like the clean vocal part with the female vocal.
Mhm.
And that was probably like the biggest risk we took on this, because some bands have done that in the past and it hasn't always worked out for them. So I tried to keep it like really tasteful, and I had it over that part, the kind of ethereal part in particular, because I thought that the best way to elevate that part and keep like the ethereal nature of it was to have a female vocal. And the woman who had done the vocal, Tabby is her name, she's just a singer in like a pop band. And I mix live sound, you know, as a second job, and was mixing her band once, just down the street here, and I thought she had a really great like a tone, and for a female vocal, she had kind of a lower tone, and I really liked that. And I was like, hey, maybe we can make this work if you're interested, because she had never done anything with metal ever. And I said, yeah, let's give it a shot, and I thought it turned out pretty good.
It did. It did turn out pretty good.
It's
Is there considering that you started to tweak, evolve, grow, add a few things to your repertoire vocally? Is there a song on this album that was perhaps a little bit more difficult in terms of getting it to where you needed the song to be in order to be worth having it on the record?
vocally, you mean, or just
Yeah,
overall?
vocally.
Um, One of the harder tracks vocally, believe it or not, was Star Crusher. It's all kind of almost like one speed through most of the song, and that riff is just like so huge and monstrous that we keep coming back to it, you know, in Star Crusher. And the problem was making it interesting vocally, because if I had to just keep going through the same motions, you know, with the same riff coming back all the time, you had to do something to elevate it. You know, I keep saying elevate, but something to elevate it, because if the song was maybe a little bit more monotone, I had to do something to bring it to make it more interesting. That's really the only track on the record that I think I really struggled with that. Which is another reason why, we had Steve do the vocals on that song and two, just to kind of break it up a little bit. But yeah, that song in particular was a little stressful because I had to really push to make it more interesting just by the vocal. Track 9 as well. Track 9 is a little different, the Palisade Chambers track, because it was real groovy. And I thought a lot of people say the vocal was really standing out on that track in particular.
By the way, before I ask you this last question, I have to say this: since you're a big fan of Glenn, if you guys ever have a chance to tour with them, he makes killer martinis. So
he
get ready for some of those.
we got a chance to play with them a couple times, and the one time that we played with them in Philly, they pulled up to the show in a Hummer, and they pulled up to the show in a Hummer, and the Hummer was hauling just a little U-Haul trailer, and they had all their shit inside of it, and they parked right outside the club in their big old Hummer. I guarantee that was Glenn's Hummer. But yeah, they're cool. The lineup that he has now. The times we've played with them were great. I was like shitting myself the whole time, because I love them so much. But
I felt the same way when I met him. They were touring with Cataclysm. They played in Toronto, and I'm friends with Maurizio, so I got to meet Glenn. Being a fan of the band since forever, since the early '90s, I you idolize the people you listen to, but finally getting to meet him in person, I felt like he was one of the coolest guys that I've ever met. Super down to
sure,
earth, super nice guy.
sure. Yeah, it's nice when it goes that way and not the
Yeah, it
opposite
doesn't
way.
always go that way. It doesn't always. You
uh,
should never meet your heroes. Like that. That
that's
that
that's what
is
they say.
statement. That's such a true statement. Last question for you: with the evolution that we see in the sound and the overall approach and the design of the record, obviously this is definitely a more mature album. It showcases what you guys have learned across the path that you've taken. Do you see with this growth perhaps a ceiling down the road, or is there any ceiling at all when it comes to Outer Heaven, the band and the sound?
I have faith in us, in the fact that we could continue to evolve. It might not be in the way that people would expect, but already have ideas churning for another album, and it might not be what people are expecting. I wouldn't say it'd be a major shift in our sound or anything, but I think there's definitely still room to grow for us, especially, since we're only 2 albums deep. you know any material before the last album was kind of like a soul searching type of thing, where it was like, okay, we're trying to figure out what our sound is. And then by the time we hit Realms, we really found our sound and what we wanted to pursue. And I think that we definitely still have some room to grow there, if my thoughts at the moment mean anything and will actually work the way that I think they will. But I hope so.
I hope so as well. You guys did a phenomenal job with this record. It really, I felt really inspired listening to it because it was such a creative album, and you can tell all the creativity and all the details that went into it, but not in a way that smacks you in the face constantly. So you're still able to enjoy just the brutality and the heaviness of the record. Great
So,
album by you guys, Austin. Thank you very much. I'll see you in Toronto on that next tour run that you guys are going to be on.
thank you. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your time as well. Thank you for having me on, and I'll see you in Toronto.
Take care, man.
Cheers.